All right, Anna, why don't you get started and we'll just assume people come on in when they're ready.
Sounds great. Thank you. Thanks for being here, everybody. I'm excited to talk a little bit more about um, what makes Brickton different, what makes Brickton great. I'm a little biased, obviously, about the middle school program, but I'm excited to talk specifically a little bit more about our middle school program and what kind of desired and expected outcomes we're looking for when students finish their time with us and move on to high school. So we're going to be talking through our Portrait of a Graduate program. It's something that we are kind of constantly working on developing, trying to improve upon. So Portrait of a Graduate is a concept of just really when we stop and think, what are the core characteristics and components that we're hoping to see in our graduates, and the core components of our programs. So Portrait of a Graduate was kind of first established in its first iteration with Judy, one of our first middle school leads back in the 2002-2003 school year. And then just over the last 2 years or so, we've moved into the process of revamping it. And that's been quite an undertaking. I've had a small hand in that, but I can't take all of the credit for that. Erica has done a lot of work with that. Some other former staff members have worked very hard to make it what it is. So when we stopped to kind of think about what are the things that make our students different, we went right to the source. Erica and Charles Martin, former director of the middle school, conducted interviews with parents of former students, alumni themselves, and asked a lot of different questions. Hey, what do you remember from your time at Brickton? What stands out as one of your greatest strengths due to the work that you did while you were a student with us? What are you noticing now that you're in high school or even college or adulthood? So really what it came down to for us is the three characteristics and the three qualities that you see here on the screen: community, agency, and scholarship. We're gonna start in just a minute with scholarship, but you can see it's kind of a continuous interconnected ebb and flow where all of these things are happening simultaneously, but there are specific realms within our curriculum, within our program, where we focus more exclusively on one or two of the aspects at a time. So we'll jump right in, talk about scholarship. You can see here on the screen, there are between 5 and 7 different characteristics listed under each category. We're not going to get into all of these tonight. I kind of went through and identified the 3 or 4 major ones that I really felt like I wanted to focus on this evening, and the things that I'm noticing, especially with our current group of students, and the students who are moving into high school at this time. So for scholarship, we'll start by just defining what this means to us. So scholarship refers to skills utilized in academics, such as how one learns, thinks, creates, imagines, reasons, and organizes information, paired with the ability to reflect on one's own learning. So essentially, when we talk about scholarship, this is where we're focusing more directly on the academic component of what our students do at Brickton, and specifically in middle school. But as you can see, just even based on the definition, this is a very broad, kind of all-encompassing how we think about our thinking, right? And the different ways that we're thinking, and especially reflecting on our own learning. And I would add reflecting on our own thinking, right? So the first aspect that I want to talk about tonight is problem solving. And so when we were thinking through and hearing from parents and hearing from students, thinking, how do Brickton students handle problems? What do they do when they're faced with a problem or faced with a challenge? We heard from those folks that these graduates use critical thinking skills to determine an appropriate response. They identify a guiding question, which all of our curriculum in middle school uses guiding questions to frame that information as we're working through math, language, natural world, all of them. And then we use that guiding question, a question that we want to know more about, and then use our resources to collect information, analyze it, synthesize it, and evaluate it in order to determine what we should do next, right? So one of the first things I thought of when I was thinking of problem solving is one of the most interesting, I think, components of the way our middle school program works is that we have 5 academic cycles throughout the year. And at the beginning of each cycle, the students receive all of their assignments for that whole cycle. So immediately from the beginning of that period, they know what they're expected to do throughout the next 6 weeks, which can sometimes feel like a lot to grapple with and to see and to think about, but it almost requires that the students immediately go into a problem solving space because they're thinking, okay, here's everything that I need to get done. How can I make that happen? How can I prioritize my time at school? What if I have conflicts? What if I have after school commitments and that's gonna, impede on my time that I have to get things done? But they get to work at their own pace. And so they're learning how to split up their work and definitely learning how to prioritize that work and how to manage their time. The next aspect of scholarship I wanted to talk about tonight is decision making. Brickton graduates recognize the value of good decision making, and they recognize how their choices can positively or negatively impact their performance, accomplishments, and state of mind. So while this falls under the realm of scholarship, like I said when I first started, these different qualities and kind of categories that we've created are very closely interrelated. And I think when we think about decision making for students, we're not just concerned with the decisions that they're making about their academics. We're concerned with the decisions that they're making and how that's affecting their mindset, right? And how that then naturally does have an effect on the work that they're doing. With decision making, this also obviously has a significant hand in making choices about how to prioritize work. But this even plays into things like where they choose to sit in the classroom, right? Who they choose to sit with. If they choose to sit with someone, or if they choose to maybe sit a little bit more privately and separate themselves and say, hey, it's going to be better for my performance, my accomplishments, and my state of mind if I make the choice to not sit right next to my friend today, right? Or even just for the next 20 minutes, I've got something I need to get done, right? So decisions about the work itself, decisions about how to tackle and complete that work as well. And then the last one before we get into some of our media components, which I'll talk about just briefly. The last one for scholarship tonight is the growth mindset. So we kind of define this as being the use of consistent self-reflection as a tool for evaluating processes and making changes accordingly. Brickton graduates are able to learn from all experiences regardless of the outcome. I could probably spend the rest of our time tonight just talking about growth mindset. It's just a really, really important thread that is kind of interwoven throughout everything that we do. Most practically speaking, we have a specific set of reflection questions that the students use during their cycle conferences. That's kind of how they reflect on how that cycle went and how they frame that information for their parents and for themselves and for their teachers. We also use those same reflection questions after trips or after any type of planned event, right? The questions are very simple. They're what worked, what was the challenge, what did you learn, how did you feel, and what would you do differently? So taking time to acknowledge positive, maybe taking time to acknowledge things that were difficult or a little bit, less than ideal. Also taking time to think about and reflect on literally how they felt in that experience. That one is often pretty difficult for adolescents. They have a lot of feelings, but it sometimes is hard for them to state and name what those feelings are. So we talk a lot about that. And so that's, yeah, something that we use really every opportunity that we can. But I really like the part here that says evaluating processes and making changes accordingly, right? So like, great, maybe you had a phenomenal experience and you loved everything about it. Awesome. Do it again the next time. Maybe you had a terrible experience and nothing went according to plan. That's okay. Let's reflect on it, figure out what needs to change, and do things a little bit differently next time. Okay, and then media literacy. So before I talk about media literacy specifically, under the umbrella of all three of our categories, scholarship, community, and agency, there is a media component. We are living in an ever evolving, ever increasing digital world. We do use computers and the internet as a tool regularly in middle school. It's not required. We have a lot of other resources and ways to get our information. But that's life, right? We all use our computers pretty much every day for our jobs. We use them to communicate with each other. So when we were really kind of trying to make our portrait of a graduate as clear and specific as possible, it felt important to have a component of something related to how our students engage with media and the digital world under each of these three categories. So under scholarship, that looks like media literacy, teaching our students how to evaluate the sources that they're using for validity, relevancy, and their impact on others by considering a variety of perspectives. They're able to support their assertions with evidence corroborated by multiple sources, and they scrutinize not just the media itself, but the form, the credentials of the creator, and the funding source, right? So I spend a lot of time in middle school talking about what makes a good or bad source, right? How can you tell what's a quality piece of source material versus something that maybe doesn't have the research to back it up, right? Maybe this is someone's opinion, or this is just based on one experience. It's not something that can speak to, a broader ing And I think a perfect example that I talk about with the middle school students all the time is, being able to identify for themselves when they're seeing sponsored content or when they're seeing actual just personal content that's being put forth for them. Being able to distinguish, companies are getting a lot more clever and creative in how they do sponsorships to promote something. It's not always very, very clear what that is. So helping the students understand that, that's not necessarily a bad thing. It doesn't mean that that's not a reliable source, but let's maybe just look a little bit more closely at why that might be something that is like an ad versus something that is, an academic or reliable source. Okay, now we're going to talk about agency. So we really took a lot of time with how we wanted to define and clarify what agency means to us and what agency means to our students. So what we determined and what we were able to boil it down to is that agency refers to emotional intelligence skills that support the individual in building independence and accountability for their learning and behaviors. It's a pretty broad definition, but that's because agency applies to a lot of different areas of our life and our lives. So we'll talk about what this looks like a little bit more specifically here with these next couple of slides. So one of the first elements of agency and having agency over your own life and your own work and your own experience is self-awareness. So we said through consistent self-reflection and mindfulness practices, Brickton graduates know their strengths, challenges, and tendencies, as well as how their emotional state impacts all three. So when we get into agency, we're really talking about how the students know and understand themselves and how they can advocate for themselves and how they can, capitalize on their strengths and work on their weaknesses, right, or their challenges. So one of the most practical ways that we do self-awareness in particular is through personal world. Those of you who have or have had a child come through the middle school program hopefully have heard about personal world. I'm a big fan. But really it's very simple. Every day for 30 minutes after lunch, we take some time for quiet reflection. We turn off the lights, we put on some classical music. We have a specific curriculum that we follow so that we're being exposed to different composers and different types of music. Throughout the weeks, we learn a little bit more about those folks as well and the specific piece that we're listening to that day. And then we have a personal world curriculum that the students work through. This year we're doing habits of mind. So we're learning about the 16 habits of mind and how we can apply those to our lives and how we can grow from them and maybe which ones we need a little bit more practice in and which ones that we already are doing pretty well in. And we know that those are some of our strengths. But the students typically come into middle school feeling a little bit hesitant or resistant about personal world. They think it's a little weird, to be honest. They're like, why are we turning off the lights and sitting quietly for 30 minutes? But pretty quickly, the general kind of agreement becomes, oh yeah, this is important. If our schedule gets interrupted for any reason, or if we're taking a trip, a day trip or something like that, and we aren't able to have that personal reflection time, the students miss it. They ask for it, and I can definitely tell a difference in their overall mindset, disposition throughout the day if they don't have that designated time. That doesn't mean that all of the mindfulness and the self-reflection happens during that time, but it is, important for us to model to the students that it's important that they take that time consistently, whether it's every day or not, but that they take the time to reflect on their own strengths and challenges and just what's, anything that's happening in their life at that time. Okay, next in agency is self-regulation. Brickton graduates recognize how they can control their feelings, actions, and responses to various situations, enabling them to assert a growth mindset while experiencing adversity. The students get a lot of opportunities to practice self-regulation. We haven't yet talked about community, but we will in just a few minutes. But we're a tight-knit community. We do a lot of things together. The students spend a lot of time with each other. They spend a lot of time with me. They spend a lot of time with other folks at the school. And so learning how to control your feelings and actions and responses when you're around people who maybe, you have different skill sets or you work differently. Learning how to regulate yourself in moments of frustration or even moments of excitement, right? How appropriate is it to scream and run around the classroom when you're excited about something? So the main ways that I see self-regulation are during our group work times. Group work is a major component of what our students do from an academic standpoint. They have group work presentations that they need to complete and that they're working on every week. That's a core component of our natural world and social world curriculums. And so every cycle the groups change. It's totally random. We draw names out of a book and they get split up. Occasionally we'll have some man-made interference and split up the 8th graders or things like that, just to make sure that the groups have a variety of experiences and perspectives. But learning how to work in really close quarters and honestly, in intimacy with each other is challenging. So learning how to regulate yourself and your emotions when somebody is doing something in a way that you think is just absolutely the worst possible way that they could do it, but figuring out how to communicate that to them in a clear, calm, meaningful way and keep yourself in check is essential to living a full and healthy life, right? That's a skill that these students will need for the rest of their lives. This also comes into play in things like gym, right? They're active, they're in the heat of the moment, they're playing a game, they're doing something, learning how to regulate their emotions if they get frustrated with the outcome, right? Or even within themselves, like, I'm disappointed that I didn't perform in a certain way. It's okay for me to be disappointed, but it's also important for me to kind of acknowledge that to myself and then regroup so that I can re-engage in a positive way, right? So the students probably get tired of hearing me say, that's a legitimate feeling, that's a valid feeling. I just need you to express it in a clear, calm way, right? There's a huge difference between allowing our emotions to control us and expressing our emotions in a controlled way. We also have quite a few options available to the students If they feel that they just need a moment aside, we have what we call the quiet corner. It's just a little corner tucked away with a bunch of pillows and a couple of little fidgety things. We have a small weighted blanket, some noise canceling headphones. The students really like that space. It's like a nice, cozy kind of safe space for them. We also have a reading corner that's over by the window that they're welcome to just kind of sit and enjoy some sun on the days that we have it, like today. Or they're welcome to go for a walk. Tell the students all the time, if you need some fresh air and you need to step out, that's totally understandable. I need to know that you're leaving the classroom and where you're going, but you're welcome to take a walk around, our space right here and just kind of clear your head. That physical movement is really important for self-regulation. And the last thing I'll say about this for today is that I also do the same thing. And I try to model that for the students as best I can. If I'm like, I'm a little overwhelmed with all the things that I need to get done, or I'm a little frustrated about how this day played out. And, maybe we agreed to a certain amount of work getting done and it didn't happen. And I feel disappointed or frustrated about that. I'm just gonna, leave the other adult in charge, whoever that may be, and go take a quick walk or go grab a cup of coffee or something like that to kind of help myself re-regulate as well. And then our last component of agency before we talk about the digital component is self-advocacy. I will try to be brief, but I have a lot that I could say about the ways that our students learn how to self-advocate, because I think it's truly one of the most incredible things that I've ever experienced with working with a group of adolescents. So our definition and reflection on self-advocacy is that our Brickton graduates respectfully and proactively advocate for the optimal circumstances, resources, and tools necessary for them to learn and perform at their best, while also standing up for their beliefs and ideas. So self-advocacy comes from knowing and learning what they need, right? You have to take the time to understand yourself and understand how you learn best, and maybe even how you process information best or how you communicate best in order to be able to advocate for those conditions, right? I tell the students all the time, this is your space. This is your community. I'm part of the community in the same way that you are. I get to make a few more of the decisions sometimes, but I don't get to make all of them. I often say to the students, here's what needs to happen. How do you all want to handle it? So we see self-advocacy through group work, again, advocating with their peers about ideas that they have, how they want to present information, what information they want to focus on. Whether that's a lab or a little bit more research about the topic that we're doing for social world that week. We have classroom jobs that the students do every morning and afternoon. This current group has decided to rotate those every cycle. Like I mentioned, our academic cycles. So at the very end / beginning of a cycle, they take a few minutes together as a group and decide like, okay, how are we going to split up the jobs next cycle? I just was vacuuming this cycle, so I'm not going to be vacuuming next cycle. I've already been the person to take out the trash. I really, really want to be the person who feeds the fish and takes care of them every day, right? So they can advocate for things like that. A lot of scheduling, kind of present to them, hey, here are the non-negotiables or the things that we have scheduled at set times, but within that time frame, you all decide what you want your schedule to look like. Every week they get together on Monday morning and schedule out the week for what all the assessments are and presentations and when those are going to be. They list them all up on the whiteboard and then go through them one at a time and say, okay, well, we've been doing this one on Thursday, and as a group, we like that we're doing it that way and it's been working, so let's keep it that way. Or like, I'm not going to be here this Thursday, so can we move it to another day? But honestly, the place that I see self-advocacy the most in, from my adult perspective, the most meaningful way is the way that our students advocate for themselves with the teacher. So whether that's currently with me or with our assistant Christina, or with previous teachers and directors who have been in that space, this comes to coming to the teacher and saying, hey, I want to make some changes to the schedule, or like I just said, I'm going to be gone. I'm taking a trip with my family. I need to plan how I'm going to make up the work that I'm going to miss. It comes from, talking about, like, I just had a student today actually who received a math quiz back, and they felt that the score and the way that the quiz was graded was not accurate. And they're like, hey, what's going on with this? And so I said, okay, let me think about it. Let me think about what makes sense, to make sure that, the information that you've learned, that that's reflected, and that you feel that that is reflected honestly. And so I thought about it, and I came back to them and said, here's my proposal. How do you want to handle it? And so giving the student, sometimes it means giving the student an opportunity to advocate for themselves. I tell them pretty frequently, hey, if you come to me and say, here's why I think this thing should be different, and here's the evidence, and here's what it would look like. I'm all for it. I'm all ears. I love hearing those kinds of suggestions, and hearing those ideas. But probably the most significant byproduct of the way that the students learn to advocate for themselves, is the relationships that they build with the adults. So the relationships that they build with their teachers, the relationships that they build with the other adults that teach their specials, if that's gym or Spanish, other staff members, right? Our students typically and very consistently build very strong, meaningful relationships with the adults at Brickton. And one of the main things that we heard, that Erica and I talked about, and kind of reflecting on these conversations that we had with alum and their parents, is, yeah, when I went on to high school and I went on to college, I had no problem approaching my teachers and asking for, what I needed, because I was so used to doing it in middle school. It just was not a big deal. I had no problem kind of stepping into this role with my peers or with other adults, because it was just such a natural part of what I practiced every day. So for that to be a skill that they're learning at 12, 13, 14, is really, really, truly very incredible. Okay, and then our digital component for agency has to do with digital diet. This is a relatively new term as far as I'm aware. I might be out of touch with there a little bit, but some of you may be familiar with this idea of a digital diet, some of you may not. But basically thinking about it the same way we think about our nutrition, right? That nothing is necessarily just bad, pure, like straight out off the top, but how we engage with it is what matters, right? So teaching and encouraging our students to consume a healthy and balanced diet of technology that maximizes productive uses and improves their quality of life by building connections, streamlining work processes, or creating opportunities to learn and share knowledge. This is done while limiting toxic technology use, such as social media scrolling, video binging, and passive video game playing. Again, current group is a huge video game group. They love to play video games. They love to talk about playing video games. And it's really been incredible to see the way that they have connected over that. But it's also led to some meaningful conversations of like, hey, I hear you all talking and deepening your relationship because of the video game playing that you're doing. I also hear you saying you were doing it really late into the night, and that now today you're really tired. Or I hear you talking about how you maybe were doing it when you were supposed to have been, working on something for school. So helping students think about their digital consumption, and their engagement with the digital world in a different way, right? It's not that video games are bad. It's not that any use of media or of digital tools is bad. It's what you're using it for, how often you're using it, when you're using it, and if it's improving your quality of life, or if it's having a negative impact on you in any way. Okay, our last kind of category here this evening, for our portrait of a graduate is community. So it says here, community refers to the qualities and skills necessary to be an engaged, integral, and valued member of any group, ranging from home to school to the world at large. So we talk about our Brickton community a lot, talk about our middle school community a lot. But as we think about community and how that manifests and reflects it within our graduates, it really does, start with immediate community and then expand from there, and helping students to understand their role within those different communities, right? Understanding their role and their place within their classroom community, their family community, then maybe broader, like the school community and then neighborhood, but then even to understand what that means for them and their role and their place in the world at large. So the first element here of community is collaboration, teamwork, and leadership. So I've already talked about some of the ways that the students collaborate and practice teamwork through group work, but they have a lot more opportunities for that, and especially for leadership. We know based on what our students and our families of former students have shared that our Brickton graduates are valuable members of any community that they belong to. They're able to achieve shared goals within their communities by effectively planning out objectives, identifying strengths and interests of the members, empowering others to find success, and achieve synergy with a wide variety of different personality types, varying ability levels, and divergent interests. One of the ways that the students get to practice leadership on a regular basis in middle school is through the role of weekly facilitator. So like I've mentioned a couple of times, our curriculum works in cycles. Each cycle is 6 weeks long, and every week we have a different facilitator. It's random. At the beginning of the year, the kids they get to design kind of like a name card that we get laminated, and then the facilitator changes every week. The facilitator leads community meeting, which we do every morning, where we listen to a little bit of the news. We do some exercises to wake up the brain. We have a time of sharing and announcements. And then we have a challenge, which these days is usually a would you rather question. I think I'm trying to remember what it was today. Would you rather always be hot or always be cold? Something like that. So just a little fun way for the kids to engage with each other. But the facilitator is the one who's responsible for keeping us on task and for going through the agenda for community meeting. We also do a lot of group planning and leading, especially when it comes to trips. We do quite a few trips in middle school, day trips, taking the train to go downtown or to go visit with other schools. We're getting ready to go on our first multi-night overnight trip next week. Our first one of the year, I should say. And so when we go downtown or we go around the city of Chicago, or when we do our end of year trip, which this year is going to be to Washington, D.C., and our trips alternate, but this year we're learning about government. The students plan those trips. They get to say, like, these are the things we definitely want to do while we're there. And then they have to figure out how to make it happen. They have to figure out how we're going to get there, how much time we need, how much it's going to cost, if we need tickets in advance, all of those types of things. So our trips are really, truly an invaluable part of our curriculum, and a way for students to practice their leadership skills from very early on. They learn pretty quickly that being one of the facilitators and the leaders early in the week on a trip is a bit more difficult than being one of the facilitators later in the week, because you're kind of learning everything on the fly, right? Maybe you don't know anything about Washington, D.C., and we're having to figure out the metro, system and stuff on your own. But they always step up in the most incredible and meaningful way. We get compliments from strangers regularly, who've just observed our group and said, wow, how old are these kids? I can't believe that you're here with them and that they're leading and that you're standing at the back while they kind of walk ahead, and lead us to wherever we're going. So our students talk a lot also about the ways that when they go to high school, they weren't afraid to step into leadership roles even there in a new space and in a new community, often in a much larger community, depending on where they decide to go for high school and college. But they're so used to practicing being a leader and the skills that it takes to be a good leader and to collaborate with their peers, that it almost feels a little bit unusual to them to not step into those roles. They don't understand what it means to kind of just sit back and passively participate, because that's not how they've been doing things for the last couple of years as middle schoolers. This is another place as well that those meaningful conversations with adults come into play. Being able to collaborate with adults, teachers, mentors. All of our middle school students have mentors that they work with throughout their time in middle school. Coaches, other adults that they're interacting with on a regular basis. The next component of community is resolving conflict. Mentioned already some of the challenges of group work. I like here and can't really emphasize this enough, but how our graduates resolve conflicts by respectfully and honestly articulating their feelings and needs, while also listening to the perspective and experience of others. They engage in these conversations with an open mind and willingness to accept responsibility for their actions, resulting in the development of stronger, more meaningful relationships. Everyone who works with the students at Brickton tries to model this as best as we can. But like I said earlier, helping the students understand that if they take a second to think about how they can communicate their feelings or their needs or their frustrations in a clear, calm way, how much more effective and meaningful that's going to be, as opposed to, just getting ticked off with somebody and then not being a good group member that day. It's okay to take space. It's okay to reset. But the way that our community grows stronger is by intentionally working through those conflicts together, right? On my notes here, I have group work, group work, group work, because I see it every day. And sometimes it's really difficult to choose and know when to kind of interject and when to let the students work through it on their own. If I ever hear a student being disrespectful to another student or a little too harsh, I'll kind of gently say, like, hey, I hear that you're frustrated by X. How can we explain that to your group mate in a way that's clear, that they're actually going to understand, and they're not going to just shut down and be like, you were being rude to me. So of course, obviously I'm not going to talk with you or work through that together. Okay, and then we have global mindset. Brickton graduates are curious about the world around them and recognize that progress is most effective when it includes a diverse set of perspectives, experiences, and voices that recognize our universal connectedness and represent different cultures, races, religions, identities, political views, etc. So diversity and perspective taking are integrated into multiple areas of the curriculum, and try to integrate these into every area of the curriculum when possible. But that ranges from our language curriculum to what authors we're choosing to have their works in our class, and the different backgrounds that those authors come from, and the stories that they're telling, what kind of characters are in those stories, different races and ethnicities, religious backgrounds, socioeconomic status, all of that type of thing. This also comes in personal world as we think about and reflect on our own experiences, and how we fit in the world and how we can broaden our perspective. And again, that we're stronger the more voices that we have and the more diversity that we have in our communities. Social world also, this comes into play quite a bit as we study different groups throughout history. We're just now wrapping up a unit on social justice and learning about different populations of people who have experienced discrimination and prejudice, and what that means, and the laws and protections that have been put into place, and also the gaps and the things that still need to happen, and the way that each of us can play a role in advocating for change and for respectful treatment of all people. The last note I have here about global mindset also relates back to trips. That's one of the elements of trips that I enjoy the most. See it all the time. Getting out into our community just nearby Brickton, getting out into the little bit broader community of the city of Chicago, and then of course our trips when we're able to travel to other parts of the country. Um, but we take the train downtown, and pretty much as soon as you step foot onto the train, you see all sorts of different folks who look different, folks who are different ages, different languages, right? Different experiences. So allowing the students almost like a little microcosm experience of getting to kind of see what the globe looks like and the global population looks like, within our city and within the parts of the world that we're able to experience together. Is truly just such a really meaningful experience for me too. It's really incredible to get to see them interacting in these different settings. And so then the last component to wrap up here is our digital component of community. So we talk about digital citizenship and digital footprint. So this element talks about how our graduates use online digital tools to safely engage in the exploration and exchange of consumer goods and ideas, following online norms and rules of etiquette to respectfully and responsibly engage with online activities and communities, making sure that they know how to make informed decisions about prioritizing their time online and offline, which kind of comes back to the digital diet that we just talked about, while also practicing being mindful of their online activity and its lasting impact on their reputation, both on and offline, right? What does it look like to interact with people in a digital space versus interacting with people in an in-person face-to-face setting, right? Why might people feel more comfortable to say hurtful, harmful things online than they would if they were in person together, right? Face to face with somebody. We talk with students about protecting their personal data while making intentional choices regarding what they search for, and definitely what they post and share and comment about online, right? All of our students have their own email address that's associated with the school, or it's a school address. So we even talk about like, hey, what are some of the things that maybe you would and wouldn't do when you're logged into your school account? Things like I'm not doing any social media scrolling from my school email. I'm not sending personal emails from my school email. There's a reason that we have these different accounts in these different realms for different types of things. So even from a young age, hopefully helping them to understand that, even if it's something that's just said in jest or something that maybe doesn't seem like a big deal, that those things can have a lasting impact, right? And stuff that goes out onto the internet is there for anybody to see, and that not only are they representing themselves, they're representing our school, and then they'll go on to represent other schools as well as their family and their communities, right? And that being an engaged, respectful member of a community even has to do with how they're engaging with information and media online. So that concludes the portion of the content that I wanted to share with all of you. I know that was probably a lot of content. It's a lot to digest in a short amount of time. I'm happy to go back and talk about any of the specific elements or characteristics that I already shared about, or to provide clarification, of course, but I did want to intentionally save some time here at the end for any questions that you all might have about what I just shared, or something that you're still left wondering about what life is like in middle school at Brickton. So I'll kind of open the floor here for questions, give you a moment to think about what you've just seen and heard.
Anna, can you talk a little bit about kind of what life after Brickton looks like? Where do our students go? How do they
Sure.
make those choices? A lot of times we have families that that are curious about next steps after Brickton, especially when, we have
Sure.
small graduating classes and some of them are going into high schools that have 3,000 and 4,000 students. And as you mentioned, our alumni come back and often feel very prepared, even in a very, very different setting often. But
Yeah.
yeah, can you talk about that process a little bit of where they go next?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for bringing that up. So the piece of deciding where to go for high school, on my end as the middle school teacher, really starts in earnest at the end of a student's seventh grade year. We kind of reserve our final conference of the year to start about talking about the high school process. Sometimes it starts sooner than that, organically. Families already know what they're looking for and what they're interested in. But we have kind of like a questionnaire that we have parent and student fill out separately, which is always I really enjoy when those come together and we get to talk about the overlap, and you can kind of see like, okay, this family has already had lots and lots of conversations. They put, every single thing the same. Or maybe the student has learned something about themselves and they're realizing, no, I think I need something that's a little bit different. So we start there, and then I kind of am as involved as I need to be throughout that process of the actual application process. Um, whether that's through Chicago Public Schools or private school. Our graduates go to all sorts of different high schools. It's one of my favorite things about our program. It's one of the things that from very early on in my time at Brickton, I was just incredibly, incredibly impressed by. So we have students who are currently at Whitney Young, Notre Dame, Trinity High School. We've had students go to Lane Tech. We have students who are at Taft High School. So we really have, those are just the couple that are coming to mind right away, but it really truly is a very, very diverse mixture of students who decide to go into public school and go into the Chicago public school system. Or if they're from one of the neighboring townships or suburbs to their local high school, versus the students who choose to go to one of the selective enrollment schools within CPS, or even one of the private schools. We also have a student who's at, just now thinking of more, we have a student who's at Waldorf right now, which is also a wonderful school that's maybe a little bit more similar to kind of what their experience is like at Brickton. But yeah, our students go all sorts of different places. We talk a lot about fit, right? Like what type of place would be the right fit for you, for learning style, for activities that you want to be involved in, even to things like diversity. Is it important to you to have a school that is diverse, in terms of gender, right? Do you want to go to a single gender school? Do you want to go to a school that has a diversity within race and ethnicity and language even? So talk a lot about that with the students and also with their parents. Our students test really well, typically. Um, so if there is any element of standardized testing that's involved, that's not usually an issue for them. They kind of are like, yeah, nah, that's fine. If a student ever came to me and said like, hey, I have this test coming up, I'd like a little support, or could we review, some math skills? I'd be happy to do that. And it's definitely something that we can do. But yeah, our students go to a variety of schools. We also have students who have gone to high schools that are also like a high school college um, collab, right? And gotten their associate's degrees, which is pretty incredible, while they're finishing up their high school diploma. So it's really, really meaningful to hear from students who come back and say, yeah, it's great. I found my people. I found, my teachers. Um, I found all of the things that have given me meaning in my community now, because I knew what I was looking for. And also, if it's not the right fit right away, we talk to students about how they can always change that decision and go to a different school later, right? If for whatever reason they feel like there's not a fit, we do talk about that too. But that doesn't happen very often. They tend to be pretty happy where they go because they know themselves well, their parents know them well, and so they make intentional choices about where they're going to go for high school when they leave. Anything else that anybody's wondering about? Like a little clarification on?
Anna, thanks so much for sharing all the information you shared tonight. That was awesome.
Yes,
It was
happy to do
definitely
it.
a lot, a lot to reinvent or kind of revise and reflect on our current or our former portrait of a graduate to what we have now, which speaks to a lot of the evidence-based things that we are seeing from our graduates, from our alumni coming back.
Yeah.
So thanks for taking the time. And if anybody thinks of any questions later on, definitely feel free to email Anna and let her know what you burning questions you have about Portrait of a Graduate. We're always available,
Yeah.
or stop in and see her. And unless there's anything else, we will conclude the evening. Okay. Thank you for the thumbs up, guys.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for being here.
Have a great night.
Good night.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.